Welcome to a special episode of GAA Embedded. I am delighted to be joined by Eamon McGee, the former Donegal footballer. Eamon, how are things over there?
Good, Mark. Good, Mark. I'm just we're all getting geared up for Halloween here now. So if we're at the house here, so if we're interrupted by two crazies, then we'll just have to adjust. All right.
Come here. I was looking back, researching for this interview over our Twitter interactions, just to see where I thought we'd start. And I suppose there's only one place really. Did you enjoy Atomic Habits, or did you finish it? Maybe there's a more important question.
I'm actually going through it. I'm actually going through it. I think there is a few very good pieces from it, and a few very good kind of wee nuggets now. But once I've seen anything by Brailsford or Team Sky marginal gains, it's just a red flag for me.
Yeah.
Matthew Saeed is got a hold of that.
Come here. So I'll explain, maybe for those who don't know, Atomic Habits is a book by James Clear, and it's kind of I suppose it's in the kind of psychology, self-help style. That's how it's been marketed anyway. The way I actually came across it because of Carolyn Curd, basically the famous psychologist who works with Tip and Limerick and the Dubs, Paul O'Connell, and we've been hearing for the last 4 years, about the great work that she does, and people kind of speaking loosely enough about it. But in Nicky Quaid did an All Ireland's final diary, the great stuff they do with the Examiner, and the Limerick goalkeeper just mentioned that the book was recommended by Caroline Curd. So I said, right, that's interesting. I'll get it on the Kindle and see what it's about. And as Eamon has mentioned there, page 1, the example of this kind of what he's basically preaching is macro thinking, as opposed to kind of it's about small little changes you can make that can have substantial differences, and how you can incorporate your environment to better your overall sense of well-being, I suppose. But page 1 is Team Sky is the example that he talks about for these marginal gains, I suppose, is what he's preaching. Now, I have to say, I find with books like this, often it starts with you wade through a lot of kind of bullshit to get any sort of applicable nugget. So they pick different examples. What as you mentioned there, I do think there is some kind of stuff that can be garnered from it. Maybe just you have to sift through a lot to get there.
And I think that's the thing with all these, whether inverted commas self-help books or whatever way you want to call them, is that they're not all going to be the magic bullet. And I think that's even if you look at it from a coaching perspective, chat to different sports people, no one person or no one book's going to have that one answer. Let's say this will start me now.
Exactly, yeah.
And if you can maybe take even 10% is a good amount for a book. 5%, if you can take something from every book and you're constantly learning, then adding a few more tools. Because I don't know, is it a reflection of me, but I've read a lot of self-help books, and I found that not one of them that's the magic key. That's the magic bullet.
Yeah, I'm 100% agree with that. I think you might read a 300-page book and only find 5 pages that are actually anyway helpful. Did you use maybe I should have checked this beforehand. Did you use a sports psychologist with Donegal, or maybe Jim's background? You probably didn't need one.
I think Jim ticked that box in terms of it's something that I wouldn't have a wild bit of experience about. You mentioned Caroline Curd, and she has an unbelievable CV. Now, you'll always get the cynical boys that say that them teams would have won regardless now, but it's like I can't really come in too much on the sports psychology debate because I just haven't experienced it firsthand. There's been wee bits where someone will come in an evening, or someone will do a talk, and the sports psychologists themselves will put their hands up and say that's a load of nonsense. You're not going to get anything from come in a week before championship and do a session with us. This has to be an accumulation of work, and it's something maybe down the line when you get involved in the coaching that you'll look at, but I definitely don't have much experience of it.
Because going back to that Atomic Habits and the lesson, I suppose, from that book, one of the examples he gave, this is not groundbreaking stuff here now, folks, but one of the stuff he gave was,
not at all.
If you say in your head, you think I need to drink 6 liters of water a day, and it's not about motivating yourself. People often talk about this like grand idea of motivation. It's actually just about setting up so that you get up in the morning, there's a bottle of water beside your bed or whatever, you have a bottle of water in your gear bag when you go out to training. And it can just be, you create an environment so that reaching that goal is a very kind of logical thing. You're not using these grand ideas that I just need to be more motivated or whatever. And it goes back to, I remember in Jim's book, he mentioned a speech he gave before the 2012 final. And it was like, there was no kind of bullshit, no emotion, none of that. It was, this is our plan. This is what we're going to stick to. I think Michael spoke after that and just reinforced those kind of set goals that, it wasn't about playing on emotion or motivation or whatever you want to call it. It was a fairly rational plan that this is our tactical plan, and we'll go out and execute it ideally perfectly, and that'll lead to what we want to get out of this, which the ultimate outcome is in All Ireland.
Yeah, and when I say I don't have experience in sports psychology, when you think of that whole experience with Jim, in terms of where he brought us, that we had an inferiority complex to the likes of Tyrone and Armagh, looking up at them, no belief in ourselves, and then he had us, and he was gradually talking to us every night that we are as good as them. We deserve to be one in All Irelands. We have the work done. Nobody's going to train as hard, and we obviously have to back that up too. Nobody is going to train as hard as us in the country. I remember him saying that a few nights. And for that's probably sports psychology in a way. That's the basics of it. Just planting them wee seeds and getting them to grow. And I thought that's probably my experience of sports psychology. Just when you were talking there, just saying, geez, Jim was doing sports psychology was.
And I'd say the vast majority of the time, it is a seamless process, that it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who's defined to do, they're just covering the psychology of this thing. There's a guy over here who I've did a piece with recently. It's not been released yet, but Kevin White is his name. He's actually a Donegal man, but he works for he used to work for Collingwood, and now he works at North Melbourne. And we were talking about how you deal with young players when they're rehabbing. So he gave an example. There's a really good documentary here, Making Their Mark, which is an AFL documentary that came out last year. And it was a young kid, Matty Royal, who's the #1 draft pick. And when he was doing his rehab, he's not a normal kid who would just sit and do his rehab diligently. He needs he would have been used to a lot of hype around him growing up, and the idea that, so he needs something to aim for. So they decided if they're in the documentary, him, the head coach, and the high performance manager, all three of them are going to cycle the height of Everest. So he's during his rehab, he's training to hit that target. Now that's as Kevin said himself, there's no theory, there's no psychology behind that's going to teach you. This is the ideal rehab plan that you need to follow for a 19-year-old kid who's out a long-term injury. But it is ultimately sports psychology that you can get a young lad to buy into that. And I'm sure that's what Jim was probably all over, kind of that marriage between coaching and sports psychology, without players necessarily even knowing it, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, thinking back in Jim, I wonder, did he, because he has a background in, was that deliberate on his part, or was it, that was just his style of coaching? Because, there's some good coaches out there that are brilliant sports psychologists that have never went near a degree or opened a book in sports psychology. They're so good, and I'm just wondering, did Jim fall into that bracket, or was he deliberately saying, right, this is the tools I've learned throughout the years, and I must actually ask him someday.
Because your mentality, definitely, I've heard you say before that you thought maybe some of the previous Donegal teams, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, so tell me if I'm wrong. I think you said before that they were mentally weak, maybe, and that was something that. Actually, can we start there? What do you mean when you say mentally weak?
Mentally weak, that's kind of grown a wee bit now. That word has evolved a bit for me from when I was playing to where I am now in terms of mentally weak. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that sometimes you just don't have the tools. That's the thing. And
right.
When I talk about mentally weak for that Donegal team, I just thought, the game in Crossmaglen where Armagh hammered us, the fact that we were such party boys, people say there was a drink culture. It wasn't necessarily a drink culture, or one that was bigger than any other county, because we would have been friendly with, Mayo players from college. We would have been friendly with, Derry players, Tyrone players, and, they would enjoy their pints as much as we did. But, the fact that we were partying at times we shouldn't have been partying. I think that was a symptom of there's that wee bit of mental weakness, that we just didn't have the edge or the cutthroat kind of the cutthroat nature to go on to be at that top level. And we just didn't know any better. Like, the people that laid the ground for us didn't know, and it was just about that culture. In terms of when I came into the dressing room, this is the way it was, and this is your behaviours, this is the culture. And I'd like to think by the time we finished up, like, we know that had changed. That that the players coming in you were expected to behave in a certain way. There were standards. There was a belief there that you deserve to win All Irelands, you deserve to win Ulster medals, and I just don't think we had that in the early noughties and up into 2010. And that's listen, it is what it is. There's loads of counties out there that are in the same boat, but it was just something I perceived as one of our problems, that we were mentally weak.
And maybe this is a chicken and egg question, but does the players change that, or does that come from the top down? And is it someone like Jim? Because I just remember going back to the book again for a second. There was I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but just for those who haven't read it, he had a chapter about yourself and your brother, and about how you were the prototype player that he wanted in this Donegal team. In terms of, I think he told a story about Neil having was it gym equipment in the boot of his car, that he compared him to some boxer that he met in London. That
this handshake. I remember reading that. I think Neil got a good bit of mileage out of that there.
And then there was yourself, which was obviously being passionate about representing Donegal, but there was the way you represented Donegal off the field. I think he told you should have been a teacher because of something I'm butchering the story now. I think there was kids at a training session or something that he saw you interacted with them and realized I should be a teacher. But the whole point was that these are the prototype players. These are the type of guys that I want in my Donegal team. Now, it sounds like you might have arrived in a very different dressing room, but very quickly were molded into the culture that he wanted. And I'm wondering, did he mold you, or did it come more naturally?
No, I think there was a bit of both in that there. Listen, myself and Neil are obviously, we're decent skins, I'd like to think, most of the time. But Jim had a certain expectation, and as we came into the dressing room, we moved away from probably what we felt should have been natural to us, and then Jim realigned us now. And
right, okay.
Just to go back to your question, like, is it chicken and egg? I think the culture has to be there first. You can take in players, like when Michael landed in, Michael Murphy, he just led it. And he set an unbelievable standard in the way he trained and the way he prepared and whatnot. But it shouldn't be on Michael to do that, because Michael will eventually go. So there has to be a culture in place that the players just immediately set up, and this is your behaviours. This is how you behave when you're in a Donegal dressing room. This is how you behave when you're training for Donegal, and that is the standard. Doesn't matter what players come in. That is the level. That's my own opinion. Now, you could get far more qualified people to come on and say, no, it starts with the players. But for me, that's it has to start from the organisation. In terms of the management, the people around them, and Donegal represents a culture, and you just follow that on. Doesn't matter what setup you come into. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. And it only benefits the next crop if you have improved that, because they suddenly have a standard that they need to uphold. So they're all kind of buying in. You have something tangible that you need to aim for, and in an ideal world, I guess it would kind of keep rolling over from there, regardless of players come and go, managers probably come and go as well. But that in an ideal world stays the same.
That's at 100%. Because we have to. And the thing about it is, we have only introduced them in terms of that their standard can get. Dublin have raised that standard, Mayo have raised that standard, and it's up to the lads that are there now to get to that standard and set things in place. And I see that happening in Donegal. We've advertised for a full-time S&C coach that's going to work with the development squads, that's going to work with the under 20 and the senior squads, and we are doing the right things. We're ticking the right boxes now, and we just have to get find another few levels, because unfortunately we just haven't got to, you know, probably where we see ourselves in terms of them semi-finals, them finals. That I'm not necessarily saying winning it, but getting to that stages. And when you look at, I think Tyrone was a real kick in the gut for a lot of us Donegal folk, in terms of, you see that we would have believed, and I'm sure there's a lot of Tyrone people that would dispute this, but we believe that we'd had that Tyrone team's number. And Michael Murphy's penalty goes in this year. You know, we beat that Tyrone team. And they go on to win in All Ireland. And you can say what you want about Tyrone in terms of, you've got to respect them. You've got to respect the way that they went out there and won that All Ireland, and the belief they have in themselves. And that's where we just need to get to. And that's coming from, you know, that work Mickey Hart's done. You know, they've come into that dressing room, and you know what, I believe ability wise that the team that won the All Ireland wouldn't necessarily beat any of the Tyrone teams that won any three the All Irelands and the Naughties. But it's just that they had the belief, they had that ingrained in them from a fairly young age, that they deserve to be there.
Come here, I want to ask you about Congress, or maybe the fallout from Congress, in a second. But just before we get to that, speaking of mentally taxing, how do you reflect on Hell Week now?
I reflect on Hell Week. It's where I should actually done a pre-condition here in this interview. We're not allowed to mention Hell Week. No, obviously there was a bit of pride hurt there now, but it's all about when you be kind of philosophical about it, it's all about the growth part of it, because, you know, I was there a day, and I would love to have been there for so much longer, because I just loved out testing myself, and a lot of it after that was, you know, physical based, and I think I'd be fairly, you know, used to that wee voice in terms of the physical demands that you would get through it. But it was just that fear-based stuff, and it just shows me that I have, like, for someone that would have struggled an awful lot with fear throughout his life, I still have a wee bit more to go in terms of, you know, getting on top of that thing, you know, because there was a time, you know, you couldn't, you know, you're crippled with that fear, and you know, you move to a situation where it's not all over your life, if you get me.
Yeah.
And then you get a wee reminder like that there, you like jumping out of a helicopter is still tough enough, but I think that, you know, a large part of that was just that I'm still a wee bit, you know, that fear still has a wee hold on things now. So it's a good reminder that there's still a wee bit more work to do.
Yeah, and we don't have to talk about this. We can move on in a second. But I actually, because I'm out of the country, I missed the Hell Week, whatever fallout. So it was only when I knew I was talking to you that I went back and watched it yesterday, to kind of discover. And I was putting myself in the shoes, and you know, and I consider myself a bit of an adrenaline junkie. But it's ironic, the things that would be a trigger for you, maybe that would have been a trigger for somebody else. Like, say for example, I don't think the helicopter would have been a challenge for someone like me, but if when you tried to ask the question and he rears up on you and says, shut the fuck up or whatever, when you're asking about the swim, that for me, I just know the red mist would have descended and I would have been, I would have lost it there. You know, it's like, I get, you know, you probably only discover enough about yourself when you're actually in that kind of that white heat, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I'm on a group chat with all the rest of the crew that done it, and from what I gather from just observing them, they seem to went on this. There was wide growth in that there. There was wide growth in that journey that they went on, and you know, it would have been very, very cool just to test yourself and go to them places that they went in there. When you see someone like, you know, Rory Stories there, he seemed to have really learned from it, and you know, there's a few of the girls there that have, you know, kind of, they just went to a place that, you know, not many people go to in their lifetime, and you know, there's definitely a lot of growth to it, and I would love to have done it. Obviously, listen, I'm making excuses here too, but I only had, you know, 4 or 5 days preparation time because that bollock Stephen Hunt pulled out, like, so I'm blaming Stephen Hunt for my escapades in Hell Week.
Eamon, how disappointed were you by the outcome of Congress this weekend?
Yeah, I was very disappointed. I thought, if you asked me this 2 months ago, I would say no, it's going to get through. It's an open goal for the GAA here. Like, how anybody can argue for the provincial system as it is, like, I just don't understand it. And then they obviously, when people talked about, I would have tweeted something out, and a few people messaged me and says, this more knowledgeable than GAA matters to me, and this says this is not going to pass. The provincial council have too much hold and too much sway. And for me, that was just kind of, geez, I can't believe we're going to have this conversation. We're going to spend another year. And to be honest with you, they're talking about, I'm not convinced that this will, I think they'll kick this can down the road again because of the provincial councils. But, the sooner we get it over and sooner we move past this, as the system as it is, the sooner we can, start building and start tweaking it towards what we want, because we're not going to keep everybody happy. We have to realize that we're like, when you hear about, you try to fix a problem in the GAA and you'll get about 100 different solutions and different directions. So you're never going to keep everybody happy. But the sooner we start this journey, the closer we can get to keeping everybody happy, if you know what I mean. Because the provincials are done, they're dead. Doesn't matter what the Ulster secretary, what the Leinster secretary, or any other provincial secretary say. They're as part of a All Ireland system, on a road to the Sam Maguire, the provincial are done, and for them to be taken into this kicking and screaming is just because it's I personally don't think they're doing it for the association. If they did, hands up and they would go for, we need to move away from the system.
So I'm kind of, am I surprised? Maybe not that you're as against the Ulster Championship as you seem to be there, but just for going to dwell on this for a second, because I do think there is a sentiment maybe within Ulster that was particularly strong last weekend, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think there is a parallel between we talk about the Ulster state of mind, right? So you go back to, is there any parallel? Now, you could say this is just a media narrative construct and dismiss it, but you look at the weekend, the Antrim chairman comes out and says we need to be careful with these outside voices, and he's speaking against Proposal B. You look back a couple of weeks ago, and the kind of chip on the shoulder mentality. I know you've mentioned the Ulster secretary and how they would view the diminishing of their prize championship, and then you fast forward to Kieran McGeary. I was thinking, the one thing I was thinking was when Kieran McGeary was talking after the Kerry game, and he was saying, they said we wouldn't, they said we couldn't, and well, we ignored them, we did it. And you can say there's no parallel between this kind of shared Ulster psychology, and it's just as I say, maybe like a media narrative that we like to create afterwards. But I'm wondering, like, do you see anything in that maybe that's that traditional, pride of place? We have what we have, we hold our own. Is there anything in that at all?
There's definitely something in it. I've been called, and I've been playing for Donegal from under 14 up, and I think from the 16 level, the players in the 6 counties were calling us free staters for long enough now. So they see themselves as, and we're all Ulstermen up here, and there's definitely something to it. Now, listen, every other county in the country, we've seen it from what Paddy Andrews was saying during the summer, buys into the siege mentality. We thought Dublin were a wee bit more pure than that, and they were all about the process. But everybody buys into it. But because the Ulster, and there's history there, and there's definitely stuff outside football that have helped create that and foster that kind of siege mentality, and it's us about them. And that's why it's maybe a wee bit more pronounced with the Ulster thing. And just on something he says there too, I know it's easy for me to say, and I've thought this because I have 3 provincial medals that I can maybe be dismissive of it now, and it's something that I debate with. If I didn't have them, would I be as quick to discard them now? But I just think from a logical perspective, from that this provincial system is so that when you have Dublin, Kerry, just breezing right through to the All Ireland series, then it's just not fair on the rest of them.
And I should stress too, like, this isn't an exercise in demonizing the Ulster, for example. That we actually don't know who voted against this. Ulster spoke out against it. Connacht seems like spoke out against it as well. So like, by no means am I coming out here and saying that they are to blame for the failure of this proposal. And
not at all. There's a lot more votes there, all right, than Ulster, but it's just they have a certain way about voicing their opinions.
Exactly, yeah. And maybe if we move off to that for a second and on to something you just mentioned there, I guess my frustration, I'm like a broken record talking about this, but the same reason that I would be frustrated by the failure of Proposal B is the same reason that I've been on this podcast, all summer talking about television coverage of GAA or the promotion of the game. And it's because I can envisage not that far away a drastically improved game. Like I can see it there. It's right there. It's within arm's reach. And for whatever reason, we keep falling short of realizing the true potential of Gaelic football. And I guess that's my biggest frustration with whatever it be, Proposal B, or we talked a lot on this podcast about TV coverage or whatever it is. It's a shared idea.
Yeah.
I know I keep repeating myself, but it is something that's right there. It's tangible. Like we can see it and we can almost touch it. And for whatever reason, we keep falling short of it. And that for me is ultimately the most disappointing thing about this.
And it's so frustrating because we have so much potential, as to become so much better than what we are as an organization, and it's so frustrating. See, like, this isn't just about championship structure. The split season, in fairness, was one of them issues that were holding us back. And this is just the one problem. But I think one of the issues is people. I need to say this carefully now. People that are making decisions are incapable of making them, in terms of the administration that we have a case of. We're trying to. They're too amateur, if that's the best way of putting it. And I think that's one of the things that's holding us back. The championship structure is a thing that from stopping us becoming a game. The funding's an issue. There's a few different issues, but I think that we can become so much better. We can, this game that is twice as good as what it is now, and I love it as it is now. I'm so passionate about it. Like, I just want the organization. I want the game to become better and become better for the people come before me or after me.
So on what you said there, there's two parts of this, the fallout from this and what we're talking about here. So there's the counter arguments against Proposal B, which is about it diminishing the provincial structures and the history of the championship and all that sort of stuff. And that I find it really hard to take that stuff seriously when you look at you hear the Leitrim chairman talk about an opening round Connacht championship game this year. His players are walking off the pitch and saying their own family won't come and watch them, and if they're coming back into the same structure next year, they're gone. So that argument, there's no sway in that. Now, where there is a sway in this, I think, is on the other side, where you have people talking about justifiable criticisms with what was Proposal B. So, and it boiled down to the development of the game and teams, the promotion of the game, which I think is an important thing, and competitive inequality, where you have Division 3 and Division 4 teams getting up into quarterfinals ahead of Division 1 teams. Now I do think they are legitimate criticisms, but I would just stress there is no structure in the world that is going to progress Division 4 and Division 3 teams. Like, no matter what format we come up with, there's more fundamental issues with games development officers and funding, and it's a rabbit hole that we can get down into. So if you fix the structure first and acknowledge that's the first step, I think that maybe that stuff isn't as big a problem. But then you have a system in Division 1, right, where you have like ultra competitive teams, kind of an elite, a strengthening elite, who are playing each other, and it's become like they're all training on this special program, and they are getting more and more competitive, and tactically that's progressing further and further. Now, so there is definitely, I do think there is becoming a more clear separation in the game, but I also think that we are seeing progress. So I guess this is a roundabout way of asking, when you look at the game now, whether it be as a spectacle with your coaching hat on, your former players hat on, are you positive about the current game of Gaelic football? Like, where do you see it at, the current landscape?
I'm not overly excited about next year's All Ireland, and I think it's been gradually going that way. Like you have to say that I'm a fanatic. I've been involved in GAA since I was, high, and I would say championship soccer, the organisation was run. I'd still be involved in it now, but I can imagine from a neutral perspective, someone that's kind of lukewarm about that might go to a game. I that we're probably in a bit of bother now, because there's just the whole Dublin dominance, the way that county boards are run, and it's just, probably just need to take stock. And you say we're heading that way, but we're heading this kind of swimming against the current. We need to be more open to change, and realize that we that myself and yourself can see the potential the game has. Like if everybody could see that there, Maurice, then we would be well down this road. But
yeah,
it's something that we need to acknowledge, that the game's probably not in as healthy a state as some people think.
And that's the ultimate. It's the dichotomy with what we're talking about here, because as great as you can see the game being, you also have to be realistic about what is the lay of the land. What are we seeing, especially amongst the disillusionment, as was spelled out for us at the weekend amongst weaker counties. And you kind of have to be realistic and be probably more critical that as good as Gaelic football could be, is it in as strong a place as we are led to believe at times? Maybe not. So I think it's a conversation that you could fall into a long time, but I do think you have to be realistic about these things as well.
Yeah, you have to be realistic. I think that I just think that Leitrim story you told, like I hadn't heard that some of the family members don't go to see their person or the player play for the county, that they just couldn't be bothered. I think that sums up what a lot of weaker counties, the position they're in. And I think that for that, I think that's an indictment of the current system, and that's why we need to get away from it. And if we can get that story out enough, I think change will come quick.
So Eamon, I was writing about Seamus Moynihan last week, and I came across a thing in the archives, which was basically an old article by Kieran Shannon. This is from years ago, and he had an idea where he had mock questions that would be on the football knowledge higher level exam. So his example was Maurice Fitzgerald has as many poor performances in Croke Park as good ones, and all Seamus Moynihan has over Cork's Kieran Sheehan, where his Celtic crosses discuss. So in a similar vein, I've been inspired, and I have two questions here for you. So the art of defending is dead in the modern game, and Jim McGuinness ruined Gaelic football. Discuss.
The art of defending is dead now. Listen, geez, have you another hour to go here? I think it's just such a lazy trope. The art of defending is like we've do so much work on defending now that you see if you're going into any coaching and coaching session and observe it. There's a lot of work being done on the tackle and what the tackle. The art of defending isn't good. It's just that players, the forwards, have so much space now, a wee bit more space, and they're conditioned so much better. They're just able to get away, and they make it look like the art of defending. But some of the actual base of defending have been brilliant. Like you seen that Peter Hart block during I think it was for the Kerry game. Real textbook stuff. Seeing some of the contacts and the dispossessions that Tyrone were about, and other teams were about. And in that Tyrone Kerry game, the ball, Tyrone were kicking the ball, and Kerry were fit to deal with. Kerry were coming out and getting on top and winning the ball, getting the hand in, and that was great to see. Like, so I don't buy into the art of defending is dead at all now. The art of defending is grand, and it's just about what the game needs. The game needed when the blanket defense was in. The game needed people communicating, people man-to-man defending, and now you see it's kind of going away from that again. There's a wee bit more space, so we'll see it, and we've seen it in a lot of games, that one-to-one defending, that tackle, that block, and all that's on the way. That's always been there, but you'll just see it more in terms of it's definitely not dead now. And Jim McGuinness ruined football. I think we've had this debate on loop since 2011. Jim McGuinness never ruined football. Jim McGuinness had a vision of how we wanted to play and how we wanted to defend, and the foundation 2011. As a system is very right. 2012 we moved on, and anybody that says we're ultra defensive just wasn't watching the games. Played some real good back in football. Murphy's goal in the All-Ireland final was a great example of that. What happened with the way is that a lot of coaches came in, rather than they just copied and pasted the whole thing. They just says to themselves, Jim McGuinness is doing this and this. You see it in GAA coaching all the time, as what's happening, who's the top team, Dublin, right, we'll copy what Dublin do. Donegal won in All-Ireland, we'll copy what Donegal do. And this is what a lot of coaches, and it was so simple, like the coaches didn't have to explain much concepts. Everybody back, stand there and shut, and it turned games, like there wasn't a lot of thought to that there, in terms of, we're seeing it now, what people are talking about pressing up. Coaches, and I've seen it myself with the club this year, the coaches are coming in and saying press up, and that's like it's the same thing, right? Go play sweeper. Well, what's a sweeper? What's your idea of a sweeper? Oh, just play sweeper. Like just press up, and there's space at the back, and how do we press up? And this is a thing that you'll see it, and as this game kind of evolves a wee bit more with teams pressing up, is that coaches that are just not qualified or just don't have the coaching down what the press up actually means, that just come out and say, right, everybody press up. What happened? Defensive error? Was there games finishing 5-4, 6-4, or what happens now? And this area, you'll see a few teams that are doing this press up, and it'll go the opposite way, whether it'll be 3-17 to whatever, and it'll become nearly too easy. And it was just all to do. It was just coaches that were just lazy coaches and couldn't be bothered, finding their own thing and maybe making their own weak tweaks that ruined a few good games. And we were always going to like, people thought this was the place football was going to go.
So I was being a bit provocative, obviously, with that question, and as obviously I totally agree with you. But I think
I chatted for a long time there.
I think they're connected concepts, right? They are. The reason I kind of brought up those two things there was there's a similarity between the two, which is that so the art of defending is dead. It's a really, as you say, I think it's a really lazy criticism, because you can see like immense defensive skill within a game, and still it can be, high scoring and high tackling. Like I was thinking about this in relation to when I wrote about it, I was writing about Seamus Moynihan. Seamus Moynihan has that famous block in 2000. He jumps on Ushim Conville's boot and stops him, and Kerry go on and win on All Ireland. Now, Ushim Conville scored 1-9 in that game, so you saw like there was Moynihan really well. The reason I was writing about that is because it's similarities with somebody like Ronan McNamee. You flash forward to him on David Clifford, and are you telling me that he is a classic art of at the modern defender, but like he went up field, scored a point, was on Clifford's boot for the whole game, but he's up against one of the best footballers we've ever seen, and he concedes 6 points from play that day. So I think it's kind of a lazy criticism where you're looking at numbers and you say, oh well, if a forward can kick that much, then obviously it's and I especially think the reason that I bring this up is because what has happened, the reason that it's so hard to be a defender now, is that the conditions have become where you have these coordinated attacks. So it's basically about maximizing high percentage plays, basically. So for a defender, it's no longer one-on-one battles. It's no longer a case where if you cancel out your man, because your man might be the beneficiary of 40 passing play where he ends up at the top of the D because they've coordinated this play, and suddenly the ball goes over the bar. Now you've done nothing wrong. It's the conditions didn't suit the same way conditions didn't suit forwards for much of the last decade, positions don't necessarily suit defenders in what we've seen over the last 2 years. And that's before you even get started talking about the rules. But it goes back to what you said there about evolution, because if you trace the evolution of football for, let's say, this century, I wanted to ask you about this and where you see it going maybe next, because you look at 2003, you've got Tyrone, and people are shocked that they have the gall for, to bring their half forward line back into their own half, for example. And it seems like this stunning thing. 2009, Kerry come along and a bit more directness, but it was coordinated directness. Like that team they played in 2009 when it had, they played Cork in the final that year. Tommy Walsh is in full forward. And, the rest of the players around them are creating space for Tommy Walsh. So he might be at the top of the D, but you have Darren O'Sullivan in one corner, Colin Cooper in the other corner. Neither of them scored that day, I don't think. Paul Galvin on the wing didn't score that day. Declan O'Sullivan centre forward. So all of them are working back and then accurately delivering ball into whoever it is, Tommy Walsh. You come along to what Donegal did 2012, the peak of your Donegal team, and that was a team that was, perfectly suited to what they have at their disposal. So it's when you have the likes of yourself, your brother, Carl Lacey, to do the job at the back, you can actually prime, and you can have Michael Murphy and Colin McFadden at the top at the other end to be more effective. So it's what we have at our disposal. We're getting the most out of that. Dublin come along and reinvent it. Now, this is a long-winded question, but the reason I bring all that up is because this common theme, right, amongst the successful teams all the way along there, is that it's a coach looking at what does he have at his disposal and how do I set up a team to get the most out of what I have here. So Jim McGuinness looked at what that Donegal team was and set up a team to get the best out of them. Kerry did the same thing. And the problem, as you mentioned there, isn't that defending is dead, or isn't that Jim McGuinness doing Gaelic football. It's that teams try and copy. We're a copycat nation and we're a copycat sport. So they just take the exact same format and throw it onto teams that it doesn't suit at all. So when people talk about the blanket defense, I don't even think about 2012. I think about 2013 and watching, a Cavan team with Darren McVeety in at his own halfback line, or Keane Mackey running around, that they suddenly teams that started copying this format, and it led to the dissension on that. But I don't think it's about all Jimmy James did was look at what was at his disposal and get the best out of it. Every other team is the problem. It's kind of bad coaching that leads us to blame that, or what we're talking about now.
It's bad coaching, surely. It's bad coaching, surely, and I think when we talked earlier in the conversation about problems within the GAA, I think that's the big problem too. That we have a lot of coaches out there in the circuit taking the check at the end of the week, and they don't actually have a Scooby-Doo what they're doing. And I think that's too demoralising a lot of players. And it's even in the county game. Maybe it's something that we need to look at, because there's a wild appetite for coach education in the GAA, and I think maybe we could look at maybe a badge system like soccer, that if you want to coach at a certain level, you need to have your badges done and you need to understand concepts, because from what I can see, and I've seen it, it says I've seen it with the club this year, that a lot of people coaching teams do not understand the concepts and don't understand what the game's about, in terms of when they say the offensive, the defensive, and they don't know how to break down them different parts of the game. They can run a drill, no bother. They can run a drill from point A to point B, but in terms of coaching that, how to play the game and how to play the different kind of the different transitions, they just really, really struggle.
And I've spoken to Niall Ronan, who's somebody, the Meath Strength and Conditioning coach, who's very passionate thoughts about this. I spoke to him about this recently, and he was telling me, he compares it to rugby, for example, and he's shocked at how easy it is to rock up at a weekend course and get your coaching badges in the GAA versus the lengths you need to go to from rugby. And we're comparing professional and amateur sports here, but this is the repercussions of that kind of that kind of ease of access, that you do get to a stage where I think that's a great idea, for example, just to have kind of a pyramid system where, as you mentioned, whether it be badges or something like that, that you could kind of progress, and they would, as I keep going back to the core theme of a lot of what we're talking about here, it would only be for the betterment of the game.
Yeah, and when you mention amateur coaches, you have to remember a lot of these amateur coaches are they've no bother taking the check or taking a few pounds at the end of the week. That they're there, and I remember we went to approach a coach with the club 2017, and he threw out a ridiculous figure ridiculous figure for the night. And, thankfully we didn't get them because, it turned out he wasn't too good. But like we says, how can you expect the club to pay that? And he says, well, I have a mortgage to pay for. Like, I'm putting time into it, and that's the way he's seen it. Like, he's seen the job with our club as a vehicle to pay his mortgage. And thankfully we got lucky. We got Michael Boylan, and someone really, really knowledgeable. Unfortunately, Michael's working in London now. But he's such a loss to the game. He's such a loss to the game, and in Donegal. And I think that had Michael stayed about, he there was big things going to happen for Michael as a coach. So hopefully we'll see him again. But he was definitely someone that understood the game and understood how I think most coaches understand, like they know football, but it's how you communicate that then to your team and how you kind of understand that coaching methodology is key to the whole thing here.
Do you see any tactical evolution on the horizon? Like, we talked there about from direct football to blanket defenses to these high percentage plays to what we've probably seen the last couple of years, which is fly goalkeepers. This is probably a speculative question, but do you see where we're going next?
It's funny you ask that because I went to watch the Donegal semi-final there yesterday. Kilcow were playing Neve Connell, and I was just looking at I was just looking at the game and thinking, what's the next step here? Where do we go from, teams will either attack, counter-attack at pace. If that doesn't work out, they go into, this horseshoe system and try and work it out. It'll go out for a kick out. They'll get whatever kick up press they do. And it's kind of a variation. Most teams are doing that. So in terms of the defensive thing, they'll press. Some teams aren't pressing. Some teams will have 2 or 3 men press and drop back, or they'll have the full team press and gradually come back with the play, and you'll end up with 15 behind the ball. I think that's what we've seen with when Dublin had the 15 men behind the ball. So I'm just thinking, what's the next stage? We've got the fly keepers, and I'm working on the answer. I'm not at the stage yet where I have an answer now, but I think possibly with the mark, I don't think we're utilizing with the mark when we do encounter that horseshoe system, or when we're working the horseshoe and we're trying to get that scoring opportunity, is that possibly we can maybe have a system or a set of play like American football, whether we create space, we get it to the man in terms he takes the mark, and it's over the bar. But that's just one aspect of play. In terms of the whole overall aspect of play, I think we might, as teams, realize that we can't actually press up. We don't have the personnel. You go back to whatever the team suits. We don't have the personnel. I'm working with Eamon McGee here. He cannot go man to man out the field. We need to we might go back to teams. They'll say, bugger this for crack. We'll go back to the defensive stay. We'll go back to just retreating behind the ball and leaving 2 men up, and trying to perfect that. I think we might go back to that before we go to anything else.
Yeah, it's funny. I think you mentioned manufacturing the mark opportunities there. It's something that I kind of played around with my own club out here in Australia. Is how just as an idea. And I think the whole thing you're trying to stress to lads is that for footballers, for as long as we've known it, has been about risk and reward. So the risk in a situation like that is if you kick a ball in, and which often happens, especially in club football, is that if he doesn't gather that mark clean, he's going to be descended on and he's going to be swallowed up whole, basically. And so the reward is a mark and a very easy scoring opportunity. The risk is that. And I would hope to see that. I wonder, will we now see an evolution where that the tactical trend is more towards the reward rather than the risk? So you see, like, we go back to the example we talked about at the very start. Seamus Moynihan was a defender who lived in an era where he had no protection. So he always marked, Park Joyce, Oisin McConville from the front. Now that was a big, big risk because if the ball's in behind, it's a goal. Yeah. But the reward is that he wins the ball clean and it allows, this swashbuckling football that Kerry wanted to play come off. And similarly, I wonder, you just touched on the press there. Like, I would love to see, is there going to be a team who looked at what Tyrone did against Kerry in the All-Ireland final and got a goal off that and said, fuck it, like we'll overload the other end of the press. So, if we're exposed, we will leave 5 forwards up. So if we win this ball off that press and we get it forward, it's a goal. Like, the goal is on there. You just take that, look at the whisk and reward here and take that opportunity to try and go either get over that press or just manufacture a chance to win the ball and move the ball quickly. And that you might see just a bit more people kind of lean towards the fact that instead of often thinking, what's the worst thing that can happen, you might see coaches and the game as a result start to think, what's the best thing that could happen? And that might lead to some sort of progress and a better spectacle, which is ultimately what we're talking about here.
And I think, you go back to, you mentioned Tyrone, you look at Cal McShane's goal for the All-Ireland final. I don't think that ball, Conor Mailer puts the ball in. And would that ball have been played, 5 years ago and that Tyrone team? It wasn't a high percentage ball in. It was, I don't want to say speculative, because Conor Mailer knew what he was doing when he put it in. He knew that the person that he was putting it into. But it was a as you say, it was a high risk ball. And I don't think that goes in. And I think that's what possibly teams, I agree 100%, will start going to wars. We'll start saying, you know what, we'll have a real cut at it here. And we'll just make peace that we're going to lose balls. We're going to get balls turned over. But we will have a cut at it. And possibly something that I was kind of toying about with myself was, if people are going to get back in the defensive structure, so we, like, say we're playing the team more, so we lose the ball, is that we keep 4 men up regardless. So them 4 men stay up and they trust that the defensive structure holds. So we're getting, once we get the ball back, that them 4 forwards are just fresh and ready to go at it. Rather than coming back and they're tired by the time we get the ball and working that horseshoe or working that ball over and back, and that they're going and they're trusting that the defensive structure holds up and is able to deal with what's been thrown at them.
Yeah, I love that. And go back to what we said earlier about the intent behind this kind of stuff. The reason that I love something like that is because not only is it, you're talking about what the desired outcome from what you want to see. So it's not only about, like, are we leaving 4 forwards up? You're kind of trusting in that I can get the remaining players to get into a zonal shape, that they in themselves, there's trust there that we can execute that tactical evolution, right? Because it's not about just saying, "Oh, just stay up," and leaving it at that, and not coaching your defenders to get into a zonal shape or whatever. So it's a challenge as a coach for someone like yourself or whoever it is who's listening to this, to be able to say, I trust, I'm going to try and back in my players' abilities and my ability to get them into a system where they don't need the safety blanket of 15 players behind the ball, that they can execute what we want to do with slightly less numbers. And going back to what I said at the very start, that it's a risk. It definitely is a risk to not get as many players back, but the reward is the fact that if we do get that turnover and we've got 4 players up the field, whatever our entries, our scoring opportunities, the scores we get will be dramatically increased, because those players, as you mentioned, will be fit and ready.
And if you say Michael Murphy was just the first man that springs to mind, that Michael's not back and he's not trying to force that turnover or making that block or getting the contact, that he's up the field and he's able to deliver, that's 100% concentrating that offense, and he's making fresh, and he's he might be picking him up, that has, after making a long bust and run forward, we've lost, the opposition team have lost the ball, and Murphy is able to everything he's about then is on the offensive style of it, rather than back worrying about turnovers and defensive shape and the zonal press and all that.
And you asked the question of whoever they're against as well, like, are you going to get forward and attack when you know that it becomes very clear to you Michael Murphy isn't going to follow you, like, whatever, you're leaving him free.
Exactly, because you think about it, you're going to put a damn good player in Michael Murphy, or like Cal McShane, or whoever that you're going to put one of your top defenders, and normally they're good enough ball players too. So you're going to think, right, if my man is not tracking me back, I'm leaving him up, I'm going to look like a bollocks, because he's just going to stay up there. And people will call it cheating. You know, we've seen this phrase, oh, he's cheating, he's not tracking back. Like, but I would flip it and say it's trust, that the Michael Murphys or whoever else are trusting that defensive structure, that they'll get the turnover, and there's enough work done that'll work out.
Eamon, I could probably talk to you about this for another hour happily, but I better let you get back and enjoy.
I know. Jeez, I love the football chat. And we were lucky enough that the twins didn't come near us too much now. What's the new? We're chatting football.
Thanks a minute for coming on today.
Maurice, appreciate that. Good to chat to you, man.